If this is a single-seat North American F-86 Sabre, what is this? Let's find out on Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. In this episode, we're going to talk about the transition from single-seat to two-seat U.S. jet aircraft. Before we get into that, let's look at a little history. The need for a second crewman usually was a dedicated mission. In this case, World War II, Douglas SBD Dauntless, a tail gunner, rear seat, or a training aircraft with the rear seat occupied by the instructor, student in front, such as this Vultee BT-13 Valiant, affectionately nicknamed, of course, the Vibrator. In some cases, a single-seat airplane in World War II was converted to a two-seater, like this Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Here's the two-seat version, the XP-47G. Only two were built. After the war, two-seat airplanes usually had dedicated missions, in this case, a trainer, the Beech T-34 Mentor, or the North American T-28 Trojan. But the first tactical jet airplane built in the U.S. as a dedicated two-seat aircraft was the Northrop F-89 Scorpion Interceptor at the very beginning of the Cold War. And the rear seat was occupied by a RIO, Radar Intercept Officer. Navy's first dedicated two-seat airplane was the A-3J Vigilante. I can already hear people typing comments, what about the F-4 Phantom? Well, the F-4H indeed was a two-seat airplane, but it actually has a bit of a story in terms of its origins, and we'll get into that in a few moments. Airplanes like the SR-71, obviously a two-seater with a recon system operator in the back seat, and the F-14 Tomcat in the 1970s with a RIO as well for this point defense interceptor. Well, here we're talking about all these acronyms. Let's take a look at some of this stuff. The RIO, as I mentioned, was Radar Intercept Officer. The RSO, Recon Systems Officer for a reconnaissance airplane. Backseater was often a WISO, or Weapons Systems Officer. And an EWO, Electronic Warfare Officer. But my personal favorite is GIB. I learned this term when I was based in the Air Force in northern Japan, where we had F-4 Phantoms. And they always talked about a GIB, which stood for Guy in Back. And thankfully, in today's military, it is also Girl in Back. But today we have the digital age, which has mitigated the need for a second seater in many cases. Airplanes like this Lockheed Martin F-35C single-seat airplane. And so the need for a second seater has been all but eliminated by the digital technologies. So we have a airplane that only needs one pilot, or in many cases, no pilot at all. But now we come to the beginning of the jet age. So let's dive in. America's first jet airplane, the XP-59, built by Bell, first flew on October 2nd, 1942, was powered by two General Electric J31 engines, which were copies based on Sir Frank Whittle's W1 engine. All of 2,000 pounds of thrust each. And I'm going to do something a little different with this episode. We're going to show you these airplanes in living black and white. Why is that? Because I want to pay tribute to this magazine, Aviation Week. And the reason is that the airplanes I'm going to show you in this episode were first seen in this magazine in black and white photos for decades. So we're going to celebrate that fact. And here we go. As mentioned, the Bell XP-59 was not only America's first jet airplane, first military jet, it was the first jet two-seater. And here it is. But wait a minute, where's the second seat? It's right there. It's an open cockpit, kind of the motorcycle sidecar of jets. And that was occupied by a flight test engineer. Here we see a young Jack Russell, flight test engineer, climbing into the front pit. It is reported that Larry Bell also took his first ride in a jet in the open cockpit on the nose. I should mention that Jack Russell also assisted Chuck Yeager in the first supersonic flight and was a pivotal part of Edwards' history, retiring as a launch officer on the B-52s that launched the X-15s. Quite a career. But here he is at the beginning. Now we get to America's first operational jet, This is the Lockheed XP-80, the legendary airplane built in 143 days from contract to first flight, and a revolutionary machine. This was nicknamed Lulu Bell. It was the XP-80. It evolved into the YP-80, which became the P-80 Shooting Star. With the advent of the Air Force, the designation changed to F-80. But this is the machine that started it all in the training world because it was converted to the T-33, affectionately known as the T-Bird. A very significant airplane. Why? It was the world's first jet trainer. It was used by 43 different countries. It flew for all these years, 1948 to 2017. Yes, the Bolivian Air Force just recently retired their fleet of T-33s. And more than 6,500 T-Birds were built. The airplane evolved into the F-94 and the F-94C Starfire that you see here, early Cold War jet interceptor. And this brings us to the transonic era. Transonic means edging the speed of sound. And so here we have the swept-wing F-86 seen on the ramp at North American. That's LAX, or Los Angeles International Airport, on the horizon. And I don't know about you, I've been in this business for more than 40 years, and I look at a photo like this, and I just get the chills. It's like you're standing there. Beautiful, beautiful photograph. But the F-86 brought supersonic flight to the Air Force in a dive. And so the Air Force felt the need for a trainer that could handle transonic flight regimes as opposed to the T-33. And so 2 TF-86Fs were built. One was lost in an accident. And this was the beginning of the high-performance jet trainer. If you broke the sound barrier in an F-86, you were awarded this Mockbusters Club certificate signed by Dutch Kindleberger and Lee Atwood of North American. And it showed that you were a member in good standing and had broken the sound barrier in an F-86. On the Navy side, you had the Grumman F-9F Cougar, and the two-seat variant was the F-9F-8T. Same with Douglas with the A-4 Skyhawk. Two-seat variant was the TA-4J. This is an interesting airplane, the Martin B-57, which was based on the British Canberra, and the B-57A, seen here, evolved into the B model, two-seat light bomber used in Southeast Asia. And the WB-57F, several were built for high-altitude research and ISR missions, high-altitude surveillance. It is reported the WB-57F could exceed 60,000 feet. And here you see the flight crew wearing their full pressure suits. The supersonic age began in 1953 with this airplane, the North American F-100. And I say that because it was the first operational airplane to achieve supersonic flight in level attitude. That airplane evolved into the C and D model seen here. And then the two-seater was the F-100F. And I should mention, and I've had a number of comments among friends that some two-seaters look even better than the single-seaters, and the F-100F certainly gets my vote. Just a beautiful, really elegant-looking airplane. The F-101 Voodoo, A model here. The B model was the Air Defense Command Interceptor. The F-102, this is interesting because the F-102 two-seater, TF-102A, was the Air Force's only side-by-side supersonic Century Series fighter. And the two-seater looks odd. It was affectionately nicknamed the Tub, but it was used in Southeast Asia, and I talked to a number of crew members, and they all loved the airplane. This also has an interesting usage for the X-15 program. Every X-15 pilot was checked out in his Dave Clark full pressure suit in the TF-102. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the English Electric Lightning, which also went from a single-seat airplane to a two-seater with side-by-side cockpit. Of the 337 English Electric Lightnings built, 50 of them were built as two-seaters. Now we come to the world's first operational Mach 2 jet fighter, the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. And this evolved into the two-seat F-104B, which was a trainer. and the D model, which was a combat-ready two-seat airplane. And you'll see a lot of these B and D designations as we continue on, and that's pretty much the distinction. The B models were trainers, Ds had the operational in-flight refueling, armament, and so on. The TF-104G, built for the Luftwaffe. I just included this because it's a cool looking photo at Edwards. And notice also the canopies open manually, hinged to the side. This is interesting. It's simple, it's effective, saves a lot of weight on hydraulics or electrics, but it definitely got the job done. And again, a Mach 2 trainer. The Republic F-105 B model seen here. Sometimes good plans don't really work out. The original two-seater was designated the F-105C. And being a Republic guy, I just have to say, sometimes, you know, the old adage, if it looks right, it flies right. This one never came to pass. What they did do is take the all-weather D model, stretch it by 3 feet at a taller vertical fin, and they came up with the F-105F. And these airplanes were converted into the F-105G Wild Weasel configurations, which you see here. The F-106 also converted to the two-seat F-106B. And like the F-100F, I consider this a really beautiful two-seat airplane. Of course, we have to mention the Northrop N-156, which became the F-5. And that, of course, begat the T-38 in 1959. The A model, the C models are flying today with upgraded cockpits, different air intakes, and they're very efficient airplanes. The Air Force's only supersonic trainer. Now, you want that Barbette trivia question? Here it is. Name the only turbojet-powered airplane in the Air Force inventory, and you're looking at it, the T-38, meaning all the other Air Force aircraft today are powered by turbofan engines. Fly Navy, let's take a look. I mentioned the F-4, obviously a very legendary two-seat multi-role fighter, but it was originally designed as a fleet defense interceptor based on the F-3H. So the F-4H was the next step, and the workload was considered so formidable that they went to the two-seat airplane, and this became the F-4 Phantom. The F-8 Crusader, Navy's first fully operational supersonic jet fighter. No disrespect to the Grumman F-11F. The F-8 was the first Navy airplane to fly over 1,000 miles per hour. And lo and behold, they created one two-seat trainer, the F-8U-1T. Now, if the airplane was named the Crusader, the two-seater could only be named, yeah, you guessed it, the Two-Sater. Crusader's subsonic baby brother, the A-7, evolved into the two-seat TA-7C. We mentioned the F-14. That was replaced in the Navy inventory by the F-18. And the two-seat F-18 is the B and D model, as we mentioned earlier. And the F model in the Super Hornet line. NASA has a dedicated chase airplane, I should say a fleet of dedicated chase F-18s. These are designated F-18B because they are land-based airplane. They're non-carrier capable aircraft. Of course, you have the EA-18G Growler, electronic warfare aircraft. And this replaced the Grumman EA-6B Prowler. What's an A-10 doing in a two-seat video? Well, there was a single, one-of-a-kind two-seat A-10 called the YA-10B, and the acronym was N/AW, which stood for Night All Weather. So this was a kind of the bridging the gap in the day attack role. Take a look at the architecture of the forward fuselage going from the A-10 to the two-seat A-10. What finally happened is that you see the lantern pod there. There were a number of advancements in avionics and onboard armament, which mitigated the need for the rear seater, and so the A-10 continued on as a single-seat airplane. The F-15 Eagle with the B and D model, as mentioned before. But this airplane was quite significant. This is the F-15E Strike Eagle, all-weather strike aircraft, air-to-ground attack airplane, used in combat, very effective machine. The F-16, Lockheed Martin's single-seater, became the B and D model, and the F is the Block 60 F-16 two-seat. This is an interesting view peeling away from a tanker, but let's take a look at the side view. And again, this is my third candidate for as good looking, if not better, as a two-seater than the single seat. Just a really nice looking machine. Because I was inverted, okay, let's have some fun. Here's a little mini name the plane contest. And please mention in the comments if you'd like me to expand on this. I'll be happy to do an episode of Name the Plane from the inside. But can you guess what kind of airplane we're in? It's a TA-4J. How about this one? This is an F-15B. And last but not least, rolling inverted at 200 feet out of Hill Air Force Base, an F-16B. So we see in the digital age that the need for a second seat is all but gone in the tactical airplanes of today. But I want to end with the poster child for largest cruise carried, the Convair B-36. And you didn't think I was going to do a video without slipping in a model box top, did you? Well, the B-36 is kind of the poster child for how many men you can stuff into an airplane. And the reason is it was a very long range, long endurance mission type aircraft. And so it carried relief crews. And here we see 17 flight crew members on the ramp getting ready to board the airplane. But I want to make the point that going from a B-36 in the early part of the Cold War with 17 crew members on board to this airplane, the Air Force's new kid, the Northrop Grumman B-21 Raider, which has 10 times the capability of the 36 and is just the 6th generation stealth aircraft, multi-role. It has technologies that even 20 years ago would have been considered science fiction. Well, guess what? The B-21 is a two-seater. So there you have it, a look at the transition from single-seat to two-seat airplanes in the jet age, and some interesting designs, and I hope you enjoyed it. Special thanks, as always, to the folks that made this video possible. My dear friend Tony Landis, the late Harry Gann of Douglas, Colonel Christian Ledette was a driving force at Edwards Air Force Base, and of course the Wings and Air Power Historical Archive. Thank you so much for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't subscribed, we'd love having you on board. Please hit the like button on your way out. It does help us with YouTube. And as always, until next time, take care.